Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight from the Great Midwest is RDV. And tonight we are just going to talk a little bit about the recent passing of Olivia Newton John in the early 70s. She survived many decades of going through various forms of cancer and all that, too. And one of the reasons why we want to talk about her is one, she was my very first crush in music and film as a young boy in the 70s and a teenager in the 80s. And I think a lot of what we're going to discuss tonight about Olivia Newton John, I think, is lost on a lot of a younger generation with things. And it's interesting to see how we can talk about talent, what it means to be a triple threat, the it factor, charisma, and certain things too, and apply it to movies. Because RDV, there are certain things that people always talk about with movies, and going back to the 30s and 40s, certain things will stand out, and people like to glamorize them all the time. But boy, I tell you what, musicals were a thing for quite some time. You had your two camps. You had your athletic type Gene Kelly with the best smile, even by today's standards, in the business of Hollywood, in my opinion. Or you had the Fred Astaire, more classical kind of trained, old school style too. And it was interesting because as people flocked to movies, especially after World War II, you start getting a lot of different kinds of films out there, but there seems to be this special love and attraction for musicals, no matter how good, how bad, how silly. And what better place to have something that you can see and watch and get crazy at than a musical? Nothing, I think, gets to the heart of the matter, and we have to bring it up talking about Olivia Newton-John as Grease. But before we get to that, we haven't ever really talked about her that much on here because we haven't reviewed Grease or Xanadu or other things.
hmm
But you're a little younger than I am too, so what do you recall about Olivia Newton-John? Anything stand out to you?
Well, I know it's my first introduction to her was in Greece.
Okay.
Uh, and yeah, even back then, I was my teens had a crush on her too in that movie. I was like, wow, she's like perfect, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
She can sing, she's beautiful, all this stuff. It's like literally, like I was so shocked that her career in movies didn't go up, or go or any better, or as far as on screen. She's just kind of like faded away and just became like a background character. Uh like I'm first looking at her IMDb right now.
Huh?
She was on Face Off soundtrack, but she wasn't in the movie. Like I was like, what? I was like, wow, because she's an amazing voice. Her career took off as far as doing the 80s, as far as doing the music videos and stuff like that. Her especially her, I was looking at her physical video, and like, wow, if you're a guy or a kid at the time who had a crush on her, and you saw that physical music video, wow.
It was scandalous at the time, believe it or
80s
not.
80s workout spandex. uh yeah, I was like, I couldn't believe that she didn't go on, and and I figured, well, maybe she just just got tired of being in front of the camera and would rather want to focus on her career because she focused on her children,
Hmm.
and just with her marriage at the time. But yeah, I've always it was always under. I mean, she came back. It was a couple years back. They had like a Grease thing
Yes.
reunion,
Yes.
and I remember her and John got the better. They had the surviving cast. And then like there's pictures of her. She was standing next to her, like the wax museum, because they debuted that her and John had like statues of themselves in
Yes.
there. So I
Uh-huh.
remember that. But I'm just saying, I just couldn't believe that this is the person who's actually genuine. She was like Sandra D. Like she to me, she whenever I saw her, she acted just like Sandra D. She was innocent, sweet. You never got that vibe where she was just like a conniving, like horrible bitch.
Yeah, and the thing too about Olivia Newton-John is that, growing up in the 70s, obviously radio was a lot more prominent than it is today,
Yeah.
but you definitely had a great mix of music, but whatever field you're in, whether it was country or rock and roll or what they would call acid rock, which kind of like a precursor to heavy metal in a way, sort of, kind of.
Yeah.
Jazz is still real big. Big band music is still big. You had in the American scene here, you would still have jazz. You would have standards like Frank Sinatra refused to do pop because he considered it lesser music. And when you talk about, singing with operas and people that were actual powerhouse singers, you obviously go to Frank Sinatra. But the antithesis to that in its own way would be, say, Elvis Presley, who bounced around with stuff. But one thing that I think they all have in common, and that includes Olivia Newton John, even as a female, is that there's something about one having a voice, and whether or not you can sing is a different issue. But having a voice, singing, carrying a tune are different. Gene Kelly, phenomenal dancer, phenomenal charisma, beautiful with his body, the way he would move, very heterosexual, which is for a role model in dancing, something that was a little bit more emphasized. Some of the higher end type of social things that you would actually be involved in back in those days with parties and all that. He was your role model, and when Olivia Newton-John came around, she was the absolute pure white bread epitome of wholesomeness, goodness, and all that
Yep.
too. And it goes back to a couple things. You can work your ass off, be really, really good at something, get the best training and techniques. You can get lucky breaks to make money and stuff. And you can have a little bit of talent. If you can maximize it, that's great. But she has that one thing that cannot be taught, and that is the it factor. And all I will say is that if any of the Olivia Newton-John videos you watch her, just stare at her eyes. The way she looks at you, you feel like her eyes are piercing your soul, and she's genuinely looking at you. And that sweetness factor you mentioned, that's what every guy responded to. Not that she was a dead fish or anything like that. As a girlfriend, she epitomized what it meant to be a nice girl, a good girl, one that you'd want to go out, one that you could take home. And Grease really kind of propelled her into ultra mega stardom, not just because of how popular the movie was, but because of her turning quote unquote into a bad girl at the end, and everything. That was like, everybody's like, oh my God, she went that way. So that was her kind of, like, I would say, especially in the mid to late 70s when this happened, turning into an adult woman where you can be a little frisky. And then with disco being really hot for several years here, you had women talking about taking things into their own hands, let's just put it that way, and when it comes to the sexual revolution, and actually hearing it on the radio. So when she did Physical, she kind of was like, oh my God, I don't know if this should really come out. Let's kind of dumb it down. And so that's why they have
Mhm.
the stupid workout clothes and stuff. And it was cheesy and campy. It wasn't
Yeah.
boorish. It wasn't filthy. It wasn't anything. And not that
It
that's
start
bad by
it
that
started
standard,
off though.
but
It started off though with the guys and the muscle guys and stuff, and then also they
yep,
go to these guys who are like
schlubs,
obese.
calorically endowed, yes,
Yes.
individuals. But yeah, from Greece to about 1985, I mean, you cannot touch her. And what's interesting to me is the hardcore fans know that she spent a lot of time in the early 70s in country music, but she had spent
Yeah.
so many years as a kid from going, I think she was born in Britain and then went to Australia, and she knew the Gibbs and all that too. But she was on, you can find old clips of her and other people
Oh
dancing, and
yeah.
there's that glimmer of all that talent way back then. It's incredible.
I wouldn't be surprised if she was on any of those variety shows at all.
Um, I tweeted a clip out the other night about it when I first heard about it, because it kind of was like a gut punch. And with some of the members here of the Extreme Movie Show, we've talked about how TV shows have changed, not just the shows themselves or type of shows, but shows like Johnny Carson were really good because they were respectful, and it was there to pimp your products in a way. But with Johnny Carson and all that too, it's just amazing that you could have all this talent that would debut on TV, and that was what you would do to make the rounds and get it out. And now you don't have to. You can Instagram it. You can have somebody digitize stuff, and you can have a big PR campaign before anything drops. And it was not like that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Bands had to learn how to play together. They had to learn to play with their own musicians. They had to learn how to set things up. It
Yep.
wasn't like how it is today. And so you get somebody like Olivia Newton-John, who started off doing stuff. She had an album or two. A few things didn't work out. She finds a role in country music in the 70s. And here's the thing about country music. It was different in the 60s and 70s. And people did not like a foreigner coming in and doing
Yeah.
well. But when she's singing stuff, and you're like, oh my God, I believe her. I can feel it. It's like, oh my God. But then when she got to pop, it was lights out for the any meatball, because her stuff is just so infectious. It's just very clean. And when I talk about her looking at you, you can learn how to do that, I guess, but it has to be believable. You can't be like, oh, these Instagram wannabe OnlyFans chicks that just put their they do the Dr. Evil thing with their thumb and think they're being erotic. I mean, it just doesn't work. You have to sell it and be real. And that's what people responded to about her, because you're not listening to her lyrics or how bad some of them they are. It's just you're hypnotized and you
She had the
can't
whole
break away.
package. That's what it was. She didn't rely on just her body, her looks. She actually had the whole personality. And that's
Yep.
what sold it too. And then, like I said, uh, she never really did anything vulgar. That's the thing too. It's like, so she still had that whole innocent thing going for her.
Yeah.
Whether she, and even when she wasn't like doing stuff, when she was on shows, um, now the funny thing is I forgot that she was on the Midnight Special. She also helped host that,
Yes.
co-host
Yes.
that even for even before she was with Grease. This exposed her to everybody. You may have heard her music, but you didn't never really knew the face or saw it. Unless you were watching TV or happened to catch her, because she was on Top of the Pops, which is another British,
Yes.
other
Yes.
thing. So back then, but as soon as she got into Grease, 1979, when that movie came out, all of a sudden it's like, dude, you saw the face, you saw everything, and just the whole transformation from innocent little, Sandra D into the smoking, hot Sandra.
The black leather at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, wow.
Well, the other thing too about Olivia Newton John is, like I say, you believe what she's saying, and when somebody does something and you don't feel like they're trying, that's good. And with her, musicals are their own special breed. And while as a kid seeing Grease and it being popular and all that too, it was one of those things where about every 8 to 10 years it seemed to kind of get a little bit more popular on the radio, and they would have mega mixes and all this stuff, and it was just fun. People enjoyed it. And of course, roller skating was a big deal, disco is a big deal, a place to dance. That changed in the 80s, but roller skating still was a thing. So you had this kind of
music playing. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm going to say empty, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but when you could talk about like Xanadu, absolutely, I mean, a product of its time. You and I did Skate Town USA,
I've
right?
never watched it, but like I always knew it was electric, like
ELO.
ELO. Yes.
Yes.
So the music soundtrack probably was better than the movie, but then again, I've never watched the movie, so I can't say it's better than that. But I know if you have ELO in the soundtrack, it's got to be at least a decent movie, right?
Well, catchy at the very least. And
Yeah.
it's like I say, Gene Kelly's last film. And the thing with Gene Kelly is as a kid, I'm going, I'm not sure who this guy is. Maybe I've seen him in something, but he's just got that brightness between his eyes and when he smiles and all that too. And he obviously knows everything about dancing and singing and skating. And so I'm like, holy crap, this is like, to me, I prefer the pairing of Gene Kelly and her on screen than John Travolta. And anybody that's a Grease fan wants to shoot me, I don't give a rat's ass. I like John Travolta. He's okay. But as I've gotten older, I go, he's just been the same, and that's not bad.
It's
just there's something about Gene Kelly that's just at a whole nother level, and I think Olivia's there too.
I mean, when it comes to John Travolta, I think his last good movie was Face Off.
Seriously, I always want him to be a Bond villain. I don't disagree with you either.
It's like he was good in the Punisher movie with Thomas Jane as the villain, yeah. But like now he's older, he's put on more weight. He just and just his acting, because he was the pretty boy. That's what he was. Seeing him in like these in other movies and this where he's just not, I don't know, like Nicolas Cage. Still, no matter what he does, Nicolas Cage still has that it factor. I don't know what it is, but he says he can still sell it, even making fun of himself. He can make a good movie out of nothing. I don't know what he does. But Travolta was. I always think and that's the thing. Whenever I see Travolta, I always think of the one thing: Grease or Saturday Night Fever.
Yep.
Those are what his style of movies. Seeing him in other movies like Broken Arrow,
I know,
which we got a review on this sometime.
That's true.
Yeah. And then going like so I was like, what is he doing here? And then I saw Face Off. I was like, you know what? That was probably like one of the best movies I've seen him outside of the Danny, character, Danny Zuko. But like I said, I'm not a huge Travolta fan, I mean, I mean, they did Grease 2, and I'm surprised. And Sandra D came back.
Grease 2 has its own,
I think.
followers. I'll just
Yeah.
say that it definitely seems like it's
Well,
not too much of a crossover crowd. That was that was a bit
no,
divisive when
Grease.
it came out.
It's just hard to define Grease and Grease 2. Grease was the car movie. Grease 2 was the motorcycle movie.
Yeah,
that's how you that, and that's why I'm one of those people that I can still like Grease 2 because I like the motorcycles.
well, one thing I wanted to mention about two of her songs around this time period that kind of exemplify the 80s a little bit, and that's what we do here in Extreme Movie Shows. We kind of branch out from the 80s and compare things, but she had one that was in Xanadu, which I think was 1980 roughly, a song called Magic. And if you watch the video, that's not the Xanadu version, but the
Her music is
lounge
great.
one.
Her pop
Well,
music.
the thing is at this particular time, most everything was still analog and not digital recorded, but the production of it, when you can hear, you don't think a lot's going on because you're so, her voice is front and center. You can hear clearly what the bass is doing. You can hear what the guitar is. You don't have somebody masturbating on a guitar or a keyboard or like that, taking away from noticing what the number one thing is, and that's her voice. And so I think bands who are a lot tighter and all that recognize this is how we make our money. This is what our meal ticket is. Let's fucking write it. So like with Olivia Newton John, you don't need a guitar solo. You don't need a keyboard thing. You need just enough to support the song with the key changes and all that, where you're not all of a sudden going, oh, it's doing this, it's doing that. But if you go back and you listen to Say Magic, you're like, wow, there's a lot going on in the song. It's not complicated. It's not too difficult of a song, but you hear all these instruments clean and pure. And that's one of the things about her voice is that excellent singer, but her emoting is extremely on point. And so immediately you're drawn in, and it's one of those voices that when you hear it, you're like, who's that? I want to know who that is. And another song of hers a couple years later that I think exemplifies the 80s too, because the 80s had just great production values. The 80s also had a lot of different experimental type things going on, because in the 70s you had like ELO that definitely said, okay, we're going to use a synthesizer and keyboard and just make catchy sounds and riffs and all that, and that's fine. And disco had its own, and some people would bash disco because of that. But when we talk about synthesizers, even though they were around a little bit in the 70s with alternate bands, when you think of Olivia Newton John, the one I'm thinking of is from Two of a Kind called Twist of Fate, where you have her kind of doubling her own vocals a little bit in the chorus of the song, which she's done in several things. If you got bands that do that, there's just something to it. And you think all the big stadium bands that did it, Queen was really good on harmonies. Kansas, all your touring bands. Styx was known for that, despite people thinking them being schlocky. They harmonized well. But when you double your own, like they would do with a few bands in the 80s and 90s, and you add a synthesizer and electronic drum to it, I mean, it's still gold. So you take a talent like hers that started off in country, change it to a little bit of pop, and then disco, and then say 80s pop. That's not easy to do. Usually when a new form comes around, you get left by the wayside. It's like, I don't expect Judas Priest to come out and sing opera, but I know he could do it if he
She's
wanted.
original Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift couldn't hold a candle to her. I mean,
I'm just saying. I'm not saying Taylor Swift is anywhere in her league. I'm just saying that's sounds like what Taylor Swift did, and she's made a living off of that. Going from country to rock or pop, whatever that is. And it's hard to do. I can't think of any other than Olivia Newton John. So
there's a lot of great singers there too,
dude,
but it's like some guys that can sing a certain style to go sing another style. You're like, I don't want to hear them sing that. Not that they're bad or they can't do it, but it just doesn't connect. You know what I mean?
So I was looking up her relatives and stuff like that. Her older sister at the time was when they were filming Grease.
Yep.
She was married to the Jeff Conway, her co-star, Mr. Barbie Wheeler from Taxi.
Well, her grandfather, I think, is a guy named Max Born. For all you physics nerds out there, go look that up too. So she's got some lineage behind her, allegedly.
Yeah, her father was an MI5 officer. He worked on the Enigma project during World War II.
Oh,
I mean, she's got some pretty cool people in her family as far as relative stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of times like you don't realize when I forgot what it was. We were looking up somebody and they're just finding out who their their dad was and stuff, and the children are, and so I think that might have been what's his name? Oh, I'm tired. I'm getting like old people's mind. I'm only 37. No offense.
My mind's still sharp, buddy.
Is it? Are you sure?
Yeah, it is.
You look at your notes.
Dude, I'm not the one looking anything up. I'm talking off the top of my head here. While you think of that, I'll comment on Ed's.
Oh, it was. Oh, yeah, it's Humphrey Bogart.
Oh yeah,
I didn't know about his son. And his
Mhm.
son, no, his son. I forgot what his son's name is, but his son's been in some couple movies too.
Mhm. Christopher Lee, of course, from Hammer horror films and many others.
Yeah.
Golden Gun. He's an operatic trained singer. He was an agent. Real interesting background. The point is we're celebrating talent here, and
Yeah.
you're born with a certain amount of it, and that's all you get as far as talent goes too. And Ed's comment here that the old expression is that talent is in country and money's in pop. There's an element of truth to that, because we've talked about how on a recent review of ours here on Xtreme Movie Show, the movie Prey, by today's standards, it's considered friggin' good. And I'm looking at it going, it's maybe tolerable at best. I don't think it was that great of a film. So when you look back at something like Grease, the thing is because that went critical mass is because it was fun, and it was written sharp enough where as a kid, if you're watching it, you're not getting all the tons of sexual innuendo there
No,
is
it's family
about
friendly, and
frustration.
it had a great soundtrack.
Absolutely. So you could watch it, and I think people still like to reminisce about the 50s, because the 80s time, people reminiscing about that. But then to kind of go as an adult, you're watching it going, yeah, there's definitely a vulgar element to Grease in it, and you're like, wow, I definitely didn't see this as a kid. The thing is it's much harder to maintain a quote unquote wholesome image like that, and to go through your entire adult career scandal free. And it was probably a little easier to hide it if you were fooling around back in the day, certainly because of social media. But I've never heard a bad thing about Olivia Newton John. I know of one or two people that have met her socially on a brief occasion here, and they all say the exact same thing that you described about her from Greece, that wholesome and just very nice and polite. And so she didn't suffer the Disney disease of once you get pegged to be on the show, you're going to be a screw up as a human being, generally speaking. And back in the day when Disney and studios would actually pour a lot of money into getting you to maximize what singing, dancing, modeling type of activity, you don't really have that much at all today. So I kind of laugh when I see, oh, this person's going to be the next this or next that or whatever. It's like,
Mhm.
they're going to get one or two big paychecks and then screw off. And it's unfortunate as movie watchers, with as much stuff that gets made today, that we just don't seem to have that same amount, a level of talent. At least that's how I'm seeing it. What do you think?
It's harder. I mean, well, I guess today it's easier to get famous than it was back then, because you start off with a lot of these girls now. They use Instagram, they end up making money that way. You can get, but like famous, like professional famous. Back then, like if you knew, if you, I don't know. I guess I'd say, yeah, it's easy. Yeah, it's easier today in a sense, but like famous, it still is kind of the same. If you don't know somebody, you have to know somebody in order to get recognized. But I mean, if you have natural talent, though, like that can go a lot. You can go a long way with it. It's just that like today's climate, as far as is popular, it's changed so much from the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, as far as music styles and all that stuff. And it's harder as a musician to stay relevant. Metallica's starting to fade away. The only reason they became famous again because Stranger Things. They just played Puppets and Masters. So all these new people are discovering older music from the 80s. It's weird. So if she was still doing a music career, I mean, I don't think her style would fit in. It's harder to do that. Pat Benatar and a lot of them,
Powerhouse singer, absolutely.
yeah, a lot of them just kind of faded out because the styles changed.
Yeah, and I think too, the industry's changed a little bit. I know for like Olivia Newton John, back in the day, and there's an element of truth to it today, where if you have talent, it opens a lot of doors and people will find you. Unfortunately, I think the ease of making something palatable enough. It's so simple. Like I say, you can take somebody that mumbles and put a beat on them and have, there's like 2 or 3 songwriters that write like 89% of all the songs that are out there in all the fields, and put somebody up there and that's it. And it's just, it just was the opposite before. You had to work really, really hard with your talent to get somewhere, hone your craft, and just become competent as a musician artistically before you typically cashed in. And so even somebody as big as Elvis had his issues, not just personally, but trying to go into acting and everything too. And I mean, I keep going back to Frank Sinatra because it almost seems like he's just too good at singing, but he was a decent actor, and he had a lot of issues with the way pop culture changed about every decade, to your point. And so he refused to kind of compromise on the way he would go about his music. He would sing the old American standards, and that's it. Would not do pop, would not do whatever. Then you get somebody like Tom Jones that's just, raw sexuality, but after about 20 minutes, you're like, and I'm done, because you don't want to hear him for 2 or 3 hours in a row. But the guy emoted really well. He had charisma. He made it okay as a male to sit there and say, you know what? I'm not going to be wearing a suit and being stuffy and being formal and polite like a lot of these Italian trained singers, the powerhouse vocalists. He said, no, I'm going to go raw. I'm going to sing black music. I'm going to just put my own little snarls and growls into it. And if you're Welsh, you're going to be born a good singer anyway. And that was a really big deal. So I think in the 60s going in the 70s, you had this branch off of people that said, you know what? Country may be whatever it is, but there's a lot of good musicians in it. It just sounded different. And I know that a lot of artists had their music remade, not just in rock and roll, but in blues and everything else there too, by people of, say, not the same ethnic diversity. And that rubbed people along, a lot of people the wrong way. But even the Beatles, some people go, well, the Beatles are overrated. They suck. They're not that good musically. Well, you don't have to be. It's how you put it together and maximize it. But I'm telling you, somebody like Olivia Newton John, it's like, imagine what it must be like to be a studio musician and say, I get to play with one of the best singers of all time. Or I don't know who this woman is, but we're on tour and it's incredible. And to go back and look at it and go, wow. And I look at a lot of people that are out there today making millions of dollars and being successful. And I'm going, who am I really saying, yeah, I got to see that level of talent. I'm just not seeing it.
So I'm looking at her music career. Apparently, she got in a lawsuit with MCA, a breach of contract and all that stuff, both sides. It resulted her that from, as of 1978, she had to wait 5 years before she could make any more music.
Oh, jeez, I'm not surprised.
So that's kind of what kind of like not killed her, but kind of like it was a really big blow to her music career.
Right.
Because she just got popular from Greece in 78, and now she can't make music.
Right. And we've talked a little bit about how, especially with movies, that we focus on how the industry's changed, but music going back, I'm going to say this. We talked about in a recent review of Skate Town USA, a really schlocky, campy kind of semi-musical film, Patrick Swayze's first, by the way. I talked about how, I saw a really good print of it, and it made it look pretty good. And I think you would ask the question of like, well, how real was the fashion and the styles? Because it was changing into the 80s a little bit. The disco was starting to fade out. But I said, no, that's pretty accurate and spot on. When you're watching it, what people looked like, what they wore. You had made the comment that a lot of people seemed skinnier then, just in the backgrounds and stuff. True.
Yeah,
and the way they look too with their hair and all that. The center part that she had a lot, and Farrah Fawcett had as well, one of the most popular posters of all time from back then. That was what everyday women looked like for the most part. And then there's differences, of course, but that was the look. It was a look, and it was a look for a very long time. So, I mean, if you could wrap up the 70s and basically in terms of what would a woman look like, again, she would be on a short list, not just in terms of talent, but just the way that she looked. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say so basically you're talking about her new image and how she changed her physical.
Yes.
Because she was inspired because of Grease. So she said that's the reason why she changed it, because of Grease. Of Sandra D going into the Spanx Clyde Sandy #2.
Right.
That's why she decided to do that with her next studio album at the time, which is Totally Hot.
Yes.
Where she started wearing the leather and stuff. So it was like mind blowing. We were all Danny Zuko's.
You know, and you bring up something interesting about that time period too, because HBO was a thing back then. Again, not having a lot of channels, so unless you caught the midnight special or Soul Train or some of these special shows where they would have musicians and concerts, or maybe the occasional late night appearance on the Tonight Show where the people would play, or Lawrence Welk or Hee Haw
Yep.
or anything. Um, it would be hard to catch something, but for her, she had a special, I remember, on HBO. I don't know what city it was filmed in, if it was in the United States or over in Australia or something. But she comes out, she's got the band in the background, and of course the spotlight's on her, not on the band. But she comes out and she's talking, she's laughing, she's having a good time. She's not sitting there bashing anybody, making statements.
Yep.
She's got her cute accent, but she got almost a semi-controversial haircut at the time, where a part of one of the sides of her head was slightly shaved or cut really kind of close, the other one wasn't. Because again, you started having all these different looks. You had a Pat Benatar haircut, you had the Dorothy Hamill haircut, you had a lot of different styles, and so she had this one out there too. And I'm like, wow. But again, when she would sing, that's front center. And if you watch her dancing, just like if you watch old Soul Train or dance stuff like that, people kind of dance kind of silly and goofy. And I keep telling you that when we go to review Break In and Break In 2 and all those kinds of movies, that was a thing back then. People, would dress like that and dance like that. And it was just a fun time to be in it. And to see her in a concert, you're like, holy crap, this is 90 minutes of incredible, and where you just sit back and you watch and you listen and you're like, wow, now I know what talent is. Thank you for setting a benchmark. I mean, just phenomenal. Her best look though to me, and you haven't seen it, but Xanadu with the slightly longer hair works for her. It just, yeah, that's number one. I mean, I think, but a lot of people like the physical look. Can't argue that.
I mean, you saw her in the late '80s. She had that everyday sitcom mom hairstyle too. It's like, so, like, I was surprised she didn't do more. Like, she didn't do TV shows, but she preferred to just do. She was doing. She did that with Two of a Kind, which also bombed because
Yes, it did.
yeah, Xanadu, and then she did that. Then she started doing her own like, I guess, boutique stuff, koala,
Yes.
whatever it was. She did that. A lot of different Australian wine products and bad bath products. She started doing that, and then just like then she had a kid, and just like she still tried to do songs, and just by that time she's like 40 years old, by like late 80s, and they're comparing her with like Tiffany and Debbie Gibson.
Yeah,
At the
there's no
time.
comparison.
I know, but it's just saying that was like the thing. It was like how they were sweet. Debbie Gibson was supposed to be like the younger version of the new version of Newton John, the innocent, sweet girl. Same hairstyle, same bangs and stuff. And then she ended up getting a cancer.
Well, that was a big deal. I mean, that's pretty much defines that, like, the second half of her life really is that she got it at a fairly young age. I'm not disparaging anybody that may have gone through something like that. I think we all know somebody that's been touched by something horrible and tragic physically, no pun intended. And for her, she became, I think, a bit more of an outspoken critic about certain things. So she went more of the natural healing route. And I'm not going to say women had it easy. I'm not going to say they had it hard, but you definitely thought of music as being dominated by males, running an industry and everything else there too. I'm not saying, that there weren't successful women or whatever, but I think she made it a lot more acceptable for women to just kind of be the front and centerpiece of anything. And there's obviously a lot of great female singers. Blondie was mentioned here in the chat, which I think is a great one too. Grace Jones, I think is pretty interesting in the '80s, but she was probably too scary for a lot of people mainstream wise. She's got a great act. She was one of the Bond villains. And when we get to our Bond reviews here on Xtreme Movie Show, get up to that one, we'll be talking about her some more. She made it acceptable, Olivia Newton John, to kind of say, let's just go and have fun, have some good music, and that's it too. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you have brought up many times one thing that I take for granted, I think sometimes, is that you've always said, just in general in the '80s, wow, people just seemed like they were having fun. Yeah, they were. And so having good, fun, happy music, there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't know that you necessarily get that today. It's like people would rather be a little bit more upset when they watch a movie or triggered or try to find a hidden message and stuff. And if somebody listens to Olivia Newton John and go, "Oh, this is syrupy high school romantic crap," it's that sad sack country kind of stuff. Well, maybe it is, but I'm going to go the Yngwie Malmsteen School of something where he says, yeah, people like to ask me about the meanings of the lyrics, and frankly, I just put stuff down that matches the music. He goes, because that's what you're going to remember. He goes, you just think the lyrics or whatever. I don't really care, and you know, they're really not that important. It's true. When you do you really know all the lyrics to Olivia Newton John songs? No, because her voice is so hypnotic, and it's like that with
Well,
really
I've
up level music.
I've always said that with there's a few different artists, female artists, I don't sing along with because I want to hear their voice. Olivia Newton John is one of them.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Because, well, they like I said, there's singers like you'll sing along with, but then there's singers like you said, she's got the hypnotic voice, dude. She had the full package, the looks, the personality, the kindness, the kind soul, and she had the voice. It's like you're a crush back then. You weren't singing along with her songs. You were actually just listening to her. You were just staring at her on the TV. You're like, I'm gonna marry that woman. That was your mindset. You're like,
okay,
you're like thinking of ways of like, I gotta try to figure out how to court this girl. I gotta move the L.
That's true. You thought, oh, this is the kind of woman that courtship is meant for.
Like, yeah, you thought about it. It's like, out of all the other women, this is the girl next door. This is what I'm looking for. Why can't I find it?
I'm gonna bring up one other band because, again, women, there's a lot of great stuff in there. Donna Summer is really hot. Shaka Khan, a whole bunch, but I have to bring up Abba because Abba gets a lot of crap from people.
Yeah, she did.
Look, let me say this about Olivia. She's not American.
No, she's
Abba's not American.
She's British Australian.
Right. So there's this sense of, well, they can be big in the States, and that's where it really counts, but nobody cares if you're big in Europe. Well, absolutely, that's not true at all. So, of course, a lot of British bands, we had the invasion over here, and there's an appetite for it. So I think ABBA definitely was, even though they got big and popular over here, when you watch those two ladies sing, whether you watch any of the backstage stuff or you get some of these places that you can go to and listen to just them singing without the backing tracks or the things removed, and you just listen to the voices, you're going, shit, that's what talent sounds like. And the last really awesome singer for me is probably Chris Cornell, who's passed away. But even before that was you think Queensryche with Geoff Tate, and if you listen to his stuff, you're like, holy mother of God, these are the people that've got supreme talent. And it's unfortunate that you can't really hold on to it for that long a period of time, especially to your point. It makes it so much easier today to kind of drift off and do other things and not stay together because you make one album, you make a lot of money, do one tour, you don't have to do it. And I'm tired of people telling me about like, no, man, you really got to listen to Nickelback. They're really good. I'm like, this guy or that guy or this or that. I'm like, I don't know. When you grow up with such strong musical talent where that really is the mainstay of it, and there's a lot of competition of it, there's no room for the friggin' 20-piece orchestras unless you're Earth, Wind, and Fire. Okay, that's the disclaimer. And the real music fans of Earth, Wind, and Fire know what I mean. But it allowed you to appreciate, like when Phil Collins blew up in the 80s, what he did on stuff. But ABBA, holy crap. And then you get like Olivia Newton John. We're surrounded by all this incredible talent, a lot of it female, front and center, no gimmicks, no auto-tune, no, well, wait a minute, they sound like this live, but on the record it sounds like this. None of that there. Talent front and center. That used to be what was heavily valued, and now I just don't think it is. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. Oh man. Just looking up for those who are wondering what she died from. Well, let's say I'll just say this real quickly. She got breast cancer in 1992.
Yep.
And then she went for treatment. It came back in 2013. And then so she get treatment, moved on. 2017 it came back and it spread to her bones and she progressed to stage 4.
Yeah. I think at that time stage, when you hear like stage 3, stage 4, that's when people go, okay,
it was in her back and everything. She had her lower back and everything. So to make it she was on. She was basically, she was using medical cannabis, whatever she could, just this cannabis oil to ease her pain and all stuff. And then she went from 2017, the diagnosis stage 4, and slowly died by 2022. So she got more than most people would get.
And I think
Yeah,
she lasting really long, and for like I said, roughly
yeah.
30 years
She,
dealing with cancers and stuff.
but
That makes me respect her a bit more, because she didn't come out and got bitter. She didn't say, "Oh, the medical industry screwed me." She always was very positive, at least publicly, and I appreciate her, even if she was putting on a good air or whatever, or not having a good time in her life, to come out and do that. And her second husband, not to bring up bad things in great detail, but he went missing at sea. And it's like, fuck, you've had cancer, you're going through all this stuff, now you have a kid, you're doing things and all that, then this happens to you, and that's a part of life, and how you deal with it. So she always is one of those people that you thought, okay, she's like a cooler. She comes in with her attitude, being gracious and all that. It just diffuses all the negative energy and all that too. And that's pretty rare to have somebody that has that quality to them. And it's another plus in her favor for it, where when you see her, she doesn't look grumpy, she doesn't look whatever, she's not overplaying her attractiveness. She's not trying to show her midriff or her belly button or her tattoos or her ass crack, or God forbid she turns around and twerk. I mean, are you kidding me?
mhm.
No need for that. Try to rise to a higher level. And I think that was just a very natural thing with her too. So it's tough, because it kind of hit me. I was like, yeah, she's older. We're losing people left and right. You and I talk about people that we've lost in movies and everything too. But there's just something about her being one of my first crushes, but also one of the most talented people I've known, that go, you know what? It's worth talking about her in terms of movies, because Grease, I'm telling you, that thing sold so well, but it's not like the next year or two later it disappeared. It still kind of has legs, kind of like Pink Floyd's The Wall had legs for like 20 years for selling. That friggin' popular, or even Led Zeppelin albums. I mean, it's just one of those things where people go, oh yeah. And I like it when you and I talk about movies that maybe you haven't seen or stuff, or we talk about the time periods, because when people chime in like they're doing tonight about how things were, it makes it refreshing. And so I can understand how when somebody watches a movie like Skate Town USA, going, why are we watching this? Well, because
Yeah.
it's got some meaning to it, No, just
Do you
phenomenal singer, actress, all that stuff.
do you
Go ahead.
remember do you remember her huge divorce from Matt Latizani back in 1995? It was like a thing, and then the guy disappeared.
It's
Apparently,
the
that's
way
interesting.
media, of course, we know today. Media is not really any different than it was back then. But if you had an in, like with People magazine or some particular thing, USA Today or newspaper, back in a way, then especially like I
Yeah.
say with sports, they would kind of overlook anything that they could publicly shame you on, because they wanted that inside connection for news. And
So
Olivia was so nice and gracious to everybody too. I'm not saying, I'm just simply saying they would put out the best positive front for her, typically, because she really was that nice of a person, it seems like.
yeah, so I was just saying, this is kind of crazy. Like, I never would have thought this would have been an American television show. Like, would like in 2000s, the late 2000s, like, oh, in 2010, because like a private investigator hired by an American television program, doesn't say what it is, but claimed that her husband was not lost at sea of the Coast Guard fishing ship, did not, back in whatever, that he was alive in Mexico. They faked his death for insurance payout, but they couldn't provide, proof beyond their own statements that they were confident. I was like that is such weird tabloid TV show. I wonder like what show that was, because this sounds really weird. But then after that, she basically married I never knew who John Easterling was. I've heard the name. He's the Amazon Herd Company. He's the president of that.
Yeah.
Wow. It's like, so she already had money as is. She was already loaded as, but then yeah, she married this guy, like, yeah.
Well, it's try not to really rag too much on people's personal lives,
No,
good or
I'm
bad.
not right. No,
No,
I'm
I
not
know
right.
you're not, but
Yeah,
it's just
no.
one of those things where, as a kid growing up, and then you see things happen, and then they're not in the public in terms of what you got to know them at, as
No, yeah.
far as like her singing. Like, she was not making lots of albums. She was not, and all that. She was in the news for not the wrong reasons, but for other reasons. It grows on you. And I can think of Steve McQueen at the time there, who died, I believe, of cancer as well, and he was seeking alternative medical means too, and that brought a lot of people up to start thinking about the American medical system too. We can talk about smoking. I mean, not that we're going to go there so much, but the AIDS thing was a big deal in the '80s about how it gets treated. So Olivia was one of the earlier ones that was a proponent of, I'm not going to say earth medicine necessarily, although I think the way she might describe it would be that, but alternative methods that maybe aren't recognized here in the United States. Some people like to say European. Um, and it's interesting the lengths people will go to if they have the means and resources to try to get rid of that. So the fact that she survived that long with what she had, and at the
Yep.
end too, and the dignity that she seemed to present about it, and being a really big pet supporter, animal supporter, and all that too. I mean, it's like, wow. I mean, you could almost understand it if she had a bad period in her life or had a negative thing to say or whatever. And so, like I say, when you've got talent, it's easy to kind of just be lazy, half-ass something, and it's still going to be better than most everything out there. But I'm telling you, in a very talent-rich '70s, she still stood out as one of the best. When you've got a lot of talent around you, I think it only helps you stay more sharp, focused, and raises your game a bit. And I always think back to, like, say Wilt Chamberlain, the best basketball player of all time, 10 times better than Michael Jordan or LeBron James or any recent one. And if I'm a guy and I've got my ego and I've got Wilt Chamberlain, I'm feeding them the ball. And then on the next play, I'm feeding them the ball again. If I've got Olivia Newton John, Olivia, what's the chord changes you would like? Oh, you want to do this? Okay, here. You want me to do this a little bit louder? I'm with you. No ego. You put that off to the side. You let talent do its thing, because ultimately that's what people pay the big money for. And that's what people want to see. That's what they want. They don't want necessarily all the glitz and smoke and mirrors and kind of closing up here, my final thoughts. You did get a little bit of that in the '70s, like with bands like Kiss or Alice Cooper. And if that's entertaining and you like it, that's fine. But there was definitely a bit of a backlash by people in the '70s by saying, well, what's with the gimmicks? Why are we taking her into country music? It was a big scandal that she won some awards early on, even though she had a ton of hits. Oh, she's not writing her own music. Well, she's a singer. She doesn't have to. So I don't know. I felt it was worth discussing her, because I think as we go along here and talk about the movie stars we lose, she's had significant impact in movies that was worth mentioning.
How could you not talk about her? I mean, Dead or Alive, she was a huge icon, and still, I've never heard anybody say a bad thing about her. How she's any a horrible person. She wasn't involved in really much in scandals. The most scandal she did that movie, the movie Physical, or not movie, but the
video.
The video, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's the closest she got to anything where that was kind of scandalous. She wasn't like going around cheating on her husband. She wasn't like doing this. She wasn't just. Now, I'm not saying I don't know her personal. I don't know what she was like outside of the camera, but everybody says that she was a sweet person. Even before I'm talking about the people before she passed away. Like she was always friends with John Travolta. After his wife, passed away, and
Right.
his son, they were friends, kept contact each other. Like I said, she's one of those icons. She's Sandra D, bro. She's electrifying. Woo.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I will close with this, because the other big female that was popular at the time, and Cher was around, don't get me wrong, but in the '80s,
Olivia Newton John had the look. Shared, not so much.
I'll disagree with you on that, because Cher definitely had a look.
Someone asked to. There was always a one.
Well, people will say she got the benefit of the rub by having a man in her group with Sonny and Cher, and whereas Olivia Newton John did it solo. I don't buy that argument, but I understand for some people they look at it. I don't. Cher's her own kind of special talent, and she was definitely around. But in the '80s, when you think of female superstars, Mariah Carey's just getting started. For all you Mariah freaks out there, I don't care how great your range
Olivia
is.
Newton John, Pat Bennett's
Madonna.
And Madonna.
So with Madonna took this idea of, I think, that and sexualizing it, especially early on with Like a Virgin and everything else there too. And there was a certain harmlessness to it in a way, but there was, I guess, a backlash if you think about it, because you would have people like Olivia Newton-John say, no, it's really important that, who you are, how you present yourself to people.
Role model the
you
girls.
have to work hard at that. I'm not saying role model, but I'm just saying you're more hyper vigilant of the way people see you, and if that's aligned with who you are, obviously it's a little bit easier. But then you see with Madonna every couple of years having to reinvent herself, and people say, "Oh, well, we're going to give Madonna a lot of credit for it because maybe she's not the greatest singer and all that, but she's smart enough to get good people around her and all that too." And you know, I don't have a problem with anybody trying to find something that works. You know, Olivia went from country to pop to disco, all this kind of stuff. She's talented enough. I look at Madonna and I go, I like a few of her songs. I think the club music sound of Madonna is good. But the bottom line is you look at Madonna today and you're like, really, Madonna? And it just makes you, and again, not a slight to Madonna because, you know, you've got talent or you don't.
Man,
Or
Madonna didn't start off sexual. She started off as innocent.
No, disagree.
I borderline stuff of that, and then she went into doing some of the other stuff. Yeah.
Well, let's just say that the idea of her reinventing herself and woman coming out like with Cher a little bit later in the 80s, dressed very, very provocatively, not like in a cocktail dress, but
I'm going based off the videos I watched, music videos.
Okay.
I don't know what she did or at the concert and stuff. I know, but you know, going off her earlier music videos, she dressed like a normal, like a kid. She wasn't like she came out pop, really teeny popper. You know, teeny popper. That's what I saw. So then, when you get to I said like a virgin and express yourself, you know, towards you got closer to the 90s. Yeah, then you saw her with the cones. But yes, Dave. I'm now I have a question for Dave. Are you talking about Andy Kaufman or talking about
No, not Andy Kaufman. No, it's just you know, you would see Oprah had her start in 80s Chicago on TVs. You saw a lot of female-centric media becoming front and center too, not just in music. So it was definitely getting popular. Comics, obviously, HBO specials. But again, to get something that just you have that raw talent, and then you get where talent's only a much smaller part of the equation, like with Madonna and everything else there too. It's a different kind of show, and if that's something that you enjoy, that's great. I mean, I love a talented person, but I can enjoy somebody who's active if they're not that talent, and I'm just feeling it. That's the good thing. And with movies, we talk about this the same way. It doesn't have to be the best movie ever made. As long as we're entertained, it can still suck. But as long as we like it, we want to watch it or talk about it, that's fine. We all have our pleasures, some guilty, some stupid, some whatever. And it was just amazing because I think you're not going to see another vocal talent like that. And the only one I can think of that's probably close by today's standards, and I'll close with this, is Lady Gaga. And I will say this. I believe she can absolutely sing incredible. She's got a powerhouse voice. She's in the wrong field. She should be doing jazz and kind of adult music like that too. Not that she doesn't sound good with the stuff that she's done, but like a lot of music today, it's overproduced. It's not clear where you can hear everything. But when she changes stuff up, I just go, you know what? Her voice and her sultriness belongs there. But to your point too, and I have to concede it because it's the right one right now, is doesn't take much to make a lot of money and be successful these days. So why would somebody try to work hard to maximize it when you don't have to? Totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Any last comments about Olivia Newton John or any questions about her?
No. My last comment is that the Hardy Boys owe her money for their twist of fate.
Or the twist of hate. Delete. Yeah, obviously, I'm just going to assume everybody's seen Grease. Xanadu has its own batch of followers. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure because I'd be embarrassed to say that as a guy, but it's friggin' Olivia Newton John. It's got one of the Gibbs in there. It's got ELO. It's got Gene Kelly.
You say one of the Gibbs, like you're like I'm just looking at her.
Well,
there was a Gibb in there.
Robin,
Which one?
Maurice, Andy, and you know they're the Bee Gees, but the one kind of was solo, and I didn't follow Tiger.
It was probably Andy. It was probably more likely Andy in there. Andy did a lot of solo stuff.
You'll know him when you see him. But yeah, but then Two of a Kind is the other one that did not do well.
I watched that because I watched that because I was like, what? They're reuniting in a different movie? And it was like, yeah, it just wasn't that great. But I mean, I still got to see Olivia Newton John, so that's a plus.
Yeah. Eric saying Madonna packages herself as a lead of fantasy.
So Madonna was Delphine.
She did the innocent looking little girl
Yeah.
wearing all the whatever stuff too. And in the 80s, we've talked about this with films. There's a level of innocence that's portrayed that everybody wanted to buy, but underneath the surface, there is like, hey, wait a minute, what's really going on here? And Madonna was smart enough, to her credit, or at least the people around her or whatever, to acknowledge it and do all that, because Madonna's got some nice club songs. She definitely does too. So, but Eric's 100% right. In terms of just pure music, it's not even close. So, yeah, Olivia's on the all-time short list when it comes to female performers. And I'll leave it at that on a G-rated note. Thanks, guys, everybody, for showing up tonight to talk a little bit about Olivia Newton John. Check out the movies if you haven't. Check them out again. There's plenty of clips on here too. Hope you see what we see about it too. But in the meantime, we'll be back on Sunday, the three of us, with Professor Pixel, doing another 80s wonderful dissection of something juicy and probably B or C level.
Check out Sharknado 5. She's in that movie, Global Swarming. And she's also in, this came out 2020, the very excellent Mr. Dundee with Paul Hogan.
Have a good night, everybody. As always, stay extreme.
Stay hopefully devoted to us as well. Thank you. Good night.
I honestly love you.